With so many ways in which films have been owned and distributed, it's hard to imagine a time when little to no thought went into a film's life after its initial release, with excess footage and prints often improperly stored or outright destroyed. And while film preservation and recovery efforts have had major successes, there are still many movies with highly sought-after footage that continue to remain lost and may never be seen again. In 1933, King Kong was released into theaters, and featured at the time groundbreaking special effects. It was so critically and commercially successful that in 1938, it became the first film in history to get re-released into theaters, starting what is now a very common trend.
We're millionaires, boys! I'll share it with all of you!
But for its re-release, the Production Code Administration, an early department of what was later revised as the MPAA, demanded the removal of nearly 5 minutes of scenes and shots deemed too shocking and violent, in order to get a PCA stamp of approval. And while 40 years later the footage was recovered and reinstated back into the film, it turns out there's still a further 20 to 25 minutes of missing scenes and footage cut before its original 1933 release, with one infamous example being the spider pit sequence, which according to a memo from the director was cut for pacing reasons.
Listen, I'm going out and make the greatest picture in the world.
For decades, production sketches were the only visual evidence of the scene, until in 1974, when a film magazine published these production stills. And while quite a few of the original models still exist today, and can even be seen as props in various films from the 1940s, the footage itself has never been found, and was most likely destroyed long ago. So with the exception of a miraculous discovery, Peter Jackson's painstaking recreation of the spider pit sequence is probably the closest we'll ever get.
I am Oz!
Many films in cinema history have fallen victim to the early practice of destroying unused cut film footage, which was often done to free up vault storage or recycle its silver content. But The Wizard of Oz is perhaps one of the most unfortunate examples.
Motion picture film must be handled with care to protect it from damage.
During June of 1939, 2 months before The Wizard of Oz would be released into theaters, the film's first test screening was held in San Bernardino, California, with a runtime of 121 minutes, but over the course of additional screenings and edits, it was whittled down to 101 minutes. Aside from a brief shot in the trailer, traces of the 20 or so minutes of deleted footage were left in the film, such as the lion's net and spray can vanishing with no explanation, which was originally removed by the witch, inciting the spooks comment,
That's ridiculous. Spooks.
and a joke about the changing of the guard, as evidenced by his upside-down mustache.
Well, that makes a difference.
Others, like the infamous jitterbug scene, one of the most expensive deleted scenes ever shot, are briefly still referenced in the film.
I've sent a little insect on ahead to take the fight out of them.
Other cut scenes include the heartfelt Somewhere Over the Rainbow reprise and a sequence involving animated bees flying out of the Tin Man.
I'll use you for a beehive.
Add to all this extensive test footage and 9 days worth of filming before the original director was fired, and you get an idea of just how much of The Wizard of Oz remains unseen.
Oh, what a world, what a world!
As of now, the Scarecrow dance is the only scene in full to have survived, with the vast majority of scenes and footage presumed to be destroyed. And while it is possible that one of the early test screening prints was spared, even if recovered, it's unlikely the original nitrate film stock would be in any usable condition, so fans may never get to see the lost scenes and footage from The Wizard of Oz. To say Stanley Kubrick was eccentric and a perfectionist is a bit of an understatement. Whether it involved over 120 takes for a scene, or an insane level of attention to detail, there are many myths and legends surrounding the director and his films, with quite a few of them involving cut footage from his movies. In the case of Dr. Strangelove, the film did not originally end with a cutaway to atomic bombs. Instead, the previous shot of Dr. Strangelove continued, in which he almost immediately fell to the ground, and shortly after, a chaotic and epic pie-throwing fight ensued. The primary reason given for the removal of the roughly 11-minute sequence is that while the pie fight was supposed to be done in a deadly serious fashion as a metaphor for war, the actors could clearly be seen laughing and having fun, and the studios refused a reshoot of the single-take, multiple-camera scene.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Another rumored reason involves a joke in the script about the president being shot, and with the editing of the sequence taking place on or around November 22, 1963, it was quickly taken out. Whatever the case, footage of the scene has never surfaced, and while some claim the footage is simply lost, others maintain it was entrusted to the Kubrick estate or possibly donated to the British Film Institute. Interestingly, it has been reported that shortly after Kubrick's death in 1999, a screening of the film containing the original pie fight ending was shown at the National Film Theatre in London. However, many assert that Kubrick's will specifically requested that any unused footage from his films be destroyed, so for now, its whereabouts remain a mystery.
The magnificence of the Ambersons was as conspicuous as a brass band at a funeral.
When most people hear the name Orson Welles, the cinema classic Citizen Kane often comes to mind. But according to Orson Welles himself, his follow-up film, The Magnificent Ambersons, had the potential to rival, if not surpass, Citizen Kane. Unfortunately, we'll never get to know. During post-production of the film, Welles was persuaded by the State Department to shoot his upcoming documentary in Brazil, in an effort to establish good relations in response to the recent Pearl Harbor attacks.
We ought to know each other better than we do. It's my job to help with the introductions.
He had been reluctant to leave, especially after a mixed reception at the film's initial test screening, but was assured by RKO Studios that they would send the film's editor Robert Wise along with a moviola so he could finish cutting Ambersons from Brazil. Welles left the country, and the latest 132-minute cut of the film was shipped to him shortly after. However, it was during the second screening of the film, where it was booed and called boring and depressing, that RKO decided to exercise their contractual right to the film's final cut. And with the supervision of the editor Robert Wise, who later became a director himself, they reshot several scenes, including a more optimistic alternate ending, and ultimately cut the film down to a mere 88 minutes.
They destroyed Ambersons, and the picture itself destroyed me.
That same year, the studio terminated the contract for the unfinished documentary Welles had left the Magnificent Ambersons for in the first place. And while long thought to be completely lost and destroyed, portions of Welles' documentary were eventually discovered. But the 40 to 45 minutes cut from the Magnificent Ambersons has not been so lucky, as the original cut negatives, along with every print aside from the final cut, are believed to have been destroyed. And while RKO instructed for the print in Brazil to meet the same fate, some believe that it was spared. So only time will tell whether an uncut print will one day be discovered or if it is forever lost to time.
Little pigs, let me come in.
Despite initially receiving mixed to poor reviews, even so far as earning a Razzie nomination for Worst Director, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is now revered by many as a filmmaking masterpiece, with the dark and ambiguous ending almost as famous as the movie itself. However, had you seen the film during its first day of limited release, you might have wondered if you were crazy upon additional viewings.
I'm dizzy. I need a doctor.
It's now known that the film originally had a much different ending, as evidenced by the on-set continuity Polaroids and the shooting script itself, in the form of an epilogue in between seeing Jack frozen in the snow and the final shot of the mysterious photograph.
Good evening, Mr. Torrance. Good evening.
The scene involved the hotel manager informing Wendy at the hospital that the police couldn't find Jack's body or evidence of anything out of the ordinary, raising more questions than answers. And while initially settling upon the scene's inclusion, immediately after The Shining premiered on May 23, 1980, he decided to cut the ending from the film, having preferred the reaction from an audience without it. But since it was already playing at half a dozen or so theaters in both the New York and Los Angeles area, early in the morning showing on the second day of the film's debut, Kubrick contacted an assistant editor named Jay Friedkin, along with an unknown Los Angeles counterpart, to physically cut the scene from the reels at each location. And by the first showing on the second day of the film's release, the scene was gone.
That is, quite a story.
Despite being one of the most sought-after lost scenes in cinema history, concrete information about the fate of the cut ending has never come forth, and it is believed that all copies of the scene were destroyed with its removal, or at the request of Stanley Kubrick upon his death. But even if an uncut print exists, much like the cut 17 minutes of footage from 2001: A Space Odyssey, it's doubtful it would ever be released.
I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
So what about you? If you could see any movie with all of its original footage, which would it be? Have you ever seen a screening with footage you never saw again? Thank you guys and gals so much for watching. Hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I'll see you next time.